Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing my August wrap-up, and this wrap-up is actually going to have two parts because in August I read 11 books, I think, but 7 of those books were audiobooks and 5 of the books were physical books. So to prevent this from being a really long, like 30-minute video, I am going to be doing 2 wrap-ups. This one is going to be all of the physical books that I read, and then I will be doing a audiobook wrap-up as well. Also, before I get into the wrap-up, I just want to say that my channel reached 500 subscribers in August, which is very exciting. It's a big milestone for me, so thank you all so much. I just really want to say how much I appreciate you, and I am grateful to everybody who watches my videos, who comments, who subscribes, all of it. I love making these videos and talking to you guys about books, and just thank you for being here and being part of my little corner of booktube. It means a lot to me. So now on to the books. The first book that I read in August was Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a retelling or reimagining of the character of Circe from Greek mythology. She is an immortal titan and a witch who shows up in many different myths and stories, but doesn't really have one story dedicated to her. And so Madeline Miller has taken all these little bits and pieces that we know about Circe and woven them together into a story where we follow her through her life, through her journey of personal growth and understanding. I have a review up on my channel that I will link below if you would like to hear more in-depth thoughts on this one. But for now, I'm just going to say I really enjoyed reading this one. I think it is very well done and very well written. It does a great job of weaving together all of these different bits of mythology and story and characters into this one storyline. I love seeing Circe's personal growth throughout the story. I actually happened to read this right around the same time that my dad had read it and my mom read it, so we were able to discuss this book as we were going through it, and I think it is a really great book for discussion. There's a lot to talk about it, so that was a really great part of reading this story. As I said, I think that the story is very well done and very well put together and written. Personally, I didn't feel a great emotional connection or personal connection to the story or the main character of Circe, which is something that is very important to me, but I still thought that it was a very interesting book and there are lots of really great aspects of it, and it was great to discuss. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because I just think it is very well done. As I said, if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on it, I do have a full review that is linked below. The next book that I read was To Bless the Space Between Us by John O'Donohue. John O'Donohue is a Irish poet, and this is actually a book of blessings. So it is a lot of times categorized under poetry. This year I've been trying to read more poetry, so that's how I ended up picking up this book. But in the beginning of the book, he actually even says, this is not poetry, these are blessings. But I think that they can really be read either way. They are written very beautifully. They can be read as poetry. I loved reading this book. It has blessings for all different events in your life, different periods of life. It just is very beautifully written. There are so many lines and passages and poems that I saved, I underlined, I would write into other books and things that I would take pictures of and send them to friends of mine. I just think that it is so beautifully written, and there's so much that was wonderful about this book of blessings or poetry, however it is that you like to read it. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Next up in August, I read The Accident Season by Moira Fowley-Doyle. This was actually her first book that came out in 2015. This year I read her second book, which was The Spellbook of the Lost and Found, and read it, which is how I ended up reading this one because I really enjoyed that book. So this follows a family that every year they have what they call the accident season, which is for 1 month they become incredibly accident prone. And in this story, one of the daughters of the family is trying to figure out what is the accident season and why does it happen to their family. This book, I had fun reading it because I really enjoy Moira Fowley-Doyle's writing style. It's very atmospheric and it's just very easy to read. I really sped through this, but I don't think that this book was as well done as her second one, Spellbook of the Lost and Found. 90% of the time I didn't know what was going on, so I did not enjoy the storyline as much as I wanted to. That being said, as I said, like it it was still very addictive to read. I still just sped through it because I like the writing of it so much. I'm interested to read more of Moira Fowley-Doyle's books as she continues to write. So I gave this one 3.5 out of 5 stars because it was fun to read, but I wasn't like that in love with it. I do actually have a full review of this as well, which I will link down below too. Then I read Kindred by Octavia Butler. This was my 70s pick for the Science Fiction Through the Decades reading challenge that I am doing. This is a historical fiction sci-fi that follows our main character Dana, who is a black woman living in the 1970s in California, when she suddenly starts time traveling with no control over her time traveling, and she always time travels to antebellum Maryland on a slave plantation. And she keeps interacting with this one white boy who lives on the plantation and saving his life throughout different points of his life. And so the story follows her as she is time traveling, as she is trying to figure out why she is time traveling and why she has to keep interacting with and saving this one boy. And then her living on this slave plantation because she doesn't have control over her time traveling, and so sometimes she has to live on this slave plantation until she is able to time travel back to the 70s. So this one I really loved. I went into it not quite sure what to expect because it's not really what I normally read. I don't read a lot of historical fiction, and especially not historical fiction that is in this time period. I usually tend to read historical fiction that is set much further into the past if I do read historical fiction. So I wasn't quite sure what I was going to think of this, but it was so good. It was so well done. It was really intense, and I would put all kinds of warnings on it for like violence and abuse and sexual assault and rape and maybe like attempted self-harm and all kinds of different kinds of warnings. But that being said, this book was so good and so well done. I couldn't put it down. It was just so intense and I had to know it was going to happen. Anyway, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This is my favorite book that I read this month. I am planning to do a review of this, but first I have to like kind of get my mind into the right like headspace to talk about it. If you're at all interested in it and you don't mind all of the warnings that would go with this, I would highly recommend reading it. And the last physical book that I read in August was Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse. So this was one of my most anticipated books of 2018, and it came out in July? I don't know, but I read it in August and I really enjoyed this one. This is a Own Voices Navajo-inspired post-apocalyptic urban fantasy. It takes place in North America after a flood has completely destroyed North America, except for a few small places, one of which is a reservation which was able to wall itself off and protect itself from the flood. After this flood, there are monsters and gods from Navajo legend that have been kind of released back onto the earth. Our main character is Maggie, who is a monster hunter. She has clan powers which come from the different clans that she is a part of that make her essentially like an incredible warrior and hunter. But our main character Maggie finds out that someone is creating monsters and she is going to find out who and hunt them down. She collects some helpers and some side characters along the way. This one I had a lot of fun reading. It did have some, you know, very classic urban fantasy tropes to it, but it was still very enjoyable to read. Our main character is very kick-ass kind of character. She's kind of a bit of a trope within urban fantasy of that kind of emotionally walled off but very kick-ass female character, and then there's the male love interest who's a little bit more of like the emotional one. But that's a fun trope. I really enjoyed that. I didn't feel like this story had a very strong plot, and it wasn't until maybe the second half of the book that I felt like it really got going. It did have action action, but there wasn't clear plot, there wasn't a lot of character development until later on in the book. So for me, since I'm more focused on the characters and somewhat on the plot and less on action, it was kind of a slow start for me, but then I enjoyed it more as it got further in and we got more invested in both the storyline and the characters. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars, and this is another one that I will be doing a full review of that will be coming up soon, so keep an eye out for that. So that is all for my wrap up of the physical books that I read in August. I will be posting my audiobook wrap up very soon in the next day or two, so keep an eye out for that as well. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!